This meeting is being recorded.
In the beginning, God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Here is a basics lesson of chemistry. An acid plus a base or alkaline always give you salt plus water. For example, chlorhydric acid plus hydroxyl of sodium will always give you sodium chloride plus water, which is the formula of the basic salt that we use in the kitchen. From the lesson we saw in chemistry, an acid plus a base or an alkaline solution always gives us salt plus water. In biochemistry, when the reproductive system is bringing together the female genitalia with a pH between 3.8 and 4.5, which is actually the ideal pH level for a woman to have who wants to get pregnant, and the male seminal fluid, which is the carrier of the sperm, with a pH between 7.2 to 7.6, which is alkaline, the neutral pH being the pH of water, which is 7. Then we obtain a fetus plus amniotic fluid. It takes about 24 hours for a sperm cell to fertilize an egg. When the sperm penetrates the egg, the surface of the egg changes so that no other sperm can enter. At the moment of fertilization, the baby's genetic makeup is complete, including whether it's a boy or a girl. We have here an image of the female genitalia with the vagina, the cervix, and the uterus, and with a fetus in the womb. Here we have a picture of a fetus at 16 weeks, and we see here the amniotic fluid. David in Psalm 139 verses 13 to 16 celebrates the power of procreation that God gave to Adam and Eve at their creation. For thou hast possessed my reign, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. And this definitely asks for a praise, a song of praise. I will praise thee, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I will praise thee, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous, marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. I will praise thee, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
This meeting is being recorded.
File number 19, Research and Discovery on the Sanctuary, the Commandments, the Statutes, and the Judgments of the Lord.
This meeting is being recorded.
We will be continuing now with the statute that we saw, number 12, the law of lawful liaison, homosexuality, and bestiality. As we go now into that file, we will look at the multiplication that the Lord is telling us in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. This is the beautiful plan of the Lord in creating male and female. It was to reproduce, obey and live, disobey and die. And here we will have a small class again, a lesson on this time what we could call anatomy and physiology of the human body or biology. Reproduction is the mechanism by which the thread of life is sustained. In one sense, reproduction is the process by which a single cell duplicates its genetic material, allowing an organism to grow and repair itself. Thus, reproduction maintains the life of the individual. But reproduction is also the process by which genetic material is passed from generation to generation. In this regard, reproduction maintains the continuation of the species. This is taken from Principles of Anatomy and Physiology, page 879. The male seminal fluid contained. The male seminal fluid is a mixture of sperm and secretion of seminal vesicles, prostate glands, and bulboretal glands. The average volume of semen for each ejaculation range is 2.5 to 5 milliliter, and the average range of spermatozoa ejaculated is 50 to 150 million per milliliter. When the number of spermatozoa falls below 20 million per milliliter, the male is likely to be infertile. Semen, as we just saw, has a slightly alkaline pH of 7.20 to 7.60. The protastic secretion gives semen a milky appearance, and fluids from the seminal vesicles and bulboretal glands give a mucoid consistency, which is a mucus-like. Semen provides spermatozoa with a transportation medium and nutrients. It neutralizes the acid environment of the male urethra and the female vagina. It also contains enzymes that activate sperm after ejaculation. Semen contains an antibiotic, the seminal plasmin, that has the ability to destroy a number of bacteria. So you can see here the wisdom of the Creator that in semen, which is the transporter of the sperm, it has a natural antibiotic, the seminal plasmin, which will destroy a number of bacteria through its passage. Since both semen and the lower female reproductive tract contain bacteria, the antibiotic activity of seminal plasmin may keep these bacteria under control to help ensure fertilization. Once ejaculated into the vagina, liquid semen coagulated rapidly because of a clotting enzyme produced by the prostate gland that acts on a substance produced by the seminal vesicle. This clot liquefies in about 5 to 20 minutes because of another enzyme produced by the prostate gland. Abnormal or delayed liquefaction of coagulated semen may cause complete or partial immobilization of spermatozoa, thus inhibiting their movement through the cervix of the uterus. From the same book, pages 890, 891. A little bit more information on the reproduction system of male and female. The mucosa contains large amount of glycogen. The vagina serves as a passageway for spermatozoa and the menstrual flow. It is also the receptacle for the penis during coitus or sexual intercourse and the lower portion of the birth canal. The mucosa of the vagina contains large amount of glycogen, which upon decomposition produces organic acids. These acids create a low pH environment that retard microbial growth. However, the acidity is also injurious to sperm cells, and the semen neutralizes the acidity of the vagina, to ensure survival of the sperm. We may be wondering now, where is this lesson bringing us to? We have presented the wonderful, wonderful gift of procreation that the Creator gave to Adam and Eve in Genesis 1. And he tells them to go and be fruitful and multiply in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. He also tells us to obey and we shall live. But if we disobey, we shall die. Beside the major destruction of human bodies and human being right now with multiple addiction and others, we also know that abortion, it has a very high rate right now, which is actually permitted by legislation, civil legislation in many, many countries. And this is drawing us now to another very important lesson to look at. And this one is not as positive, but it needs to be talked about. And we have mentioned it earlier in our lessons a day ago, and now we will approach it with this basis that we just saw. Baal Peor. Baal Peor we saw has to do with homosexuality, lesbianism, transgenderism, and also it brings in the worship to Molech, which is a false god. Of course, all the false gods are demons. And the worship of Molech, even Solomon committed that abomination by offering his firstborn to Molech. And this was supposed to be bringing prosperity. And Solomon was guilty of that because of the Eden woman that he married. So Baal Peor, now we have learned also that it's the Lord of the opening. Baal meaning Lord or owner, and it refers to Satan, where Peor means the cleft or the gap from the word pahar, which means to open wide. Now we're going to approach it differently in this study that we did in the precedent study, and it has to do now with the abuse of the reproduction system. And you may think that this is not important nowadays, but it has actually a level of pandemic for what it does to even children today and adult. Oral sex increases cancers of mouth and throat in children and adult. The cleft or opening to which Peor refers to was the woman's genital part. The goddess Ashtoreth was the representation of the female genital part, while Molech was the representation of the male genital part. And this is all pagan, of course, and this is found throughout the Old Testament, and even the children of Israel, when they were in rebellion against God, were committing this terrible crime of worshiping Baal Peor. While all immoral sexual acts were considered an homage to Baal, the worship of Baal Peor was considered to be the most obscene. The temples had dedicated male and female prostitute, priest and priestess, and anal and oral sex were practiced by same-sex or opposite sex in order to commune with Baal Peor. So you can see this is very, very old. Homosexuality is not something new. It has existed before the flood, after the flood, and when it reached Sodom and Gomorrah, 5 cities of the plain were destroyed because of this terrible abomination. And today, we have it in the midst of us through civil legislation of our government. While male prostitutes participated in the act, only the feminine principle was glorified. Man had to sacrifice his manhood to join in the act. In either case, he effeminized himself. This brought glory to Baal Peor because the worshipper had to abase himself both physically and spiritually before the cleft. The rites of Baal Peor only exalt the woman principle. And that also relates to not only the genital part, but it also has to do with what we hear today about feminism, worshiping the woman, and the man has no longer this human or this manhood that he should have and be respected for. Some have asked us, are you saying that acts of sodomy, anal or oral sex are sinful even in marriage? While there are likely a number of mixed messages people give to this question, it is a sin even in a marriage. And there are several reasons for this. Sodomy is a sin. Similar to the meaning of Peor or Balaam father, the Hebrew word for Sodom literally means burning. Sodomy is defined as anal or oral copulation with a member of the opposite sex, copulation with a member of the same sex, or bestiality. The act is considered sodomy even when it pertains to the opposite sex, which means that heterosexuals who participate in this act are sodomites by the very definition of the word. It wouldn't take long in reviewing the scriptures to understand how God feels about sodomy. The Bible is not silent on this topic. And today, in parenthesis, we have leaders in the church that actually claim that we should remove chapter 18 of Leviticus, which speaks about homosexuality and the abomination of homosexuality, as well as Leviticus 20 and Romans chapter 1, because they say this is no longer applicable. After all, we have evolved since Sodom and Gomorrah. We're afraid that the great evolution that they have gone through will soon be seeing the wrath of God coming upon the earth, and the result of it will be fire and brimstone again. That's the only thing that they will get for their disobedience, nothing more. Number 2, it is idolatry. The word sodomite in the Old Testament is the word kadesh, which means male temple prostitute. The male counterpart to that, the word kadesha, is often translated as harlot or whore. Some say that God only disapproved of this act as it's related to temple prostitution. Yet, the act itself is an act of idolatry no matter who performs it. One does not have to be a temple whore of Baal for the act to be sinful. On the contrary, one becomes a temple whore of Baal by doing the act. Holding true to the definition of the word sodomy, these temple prostitutes would perform homosexual acts on anyone regardless of gender. The act itself was the means by which the participants were joined to or became one with Baal. And listen to this, the act itself was the mean of worship by which Baal was sought to cross over and indwell the participants. Today, music performers entice young and old in the practice of the worship of Baal Peor with their lyrics, subliminal videos, and images. This is present time, present, not truth, falsehood actually of what they're presenting, but this is what's happening in our very midst, even among Christians. Remember, the act itself was the means by which the participants were joined to or became one with Baal. The act itself was the mean of worship by which Baal was sought to cross over and indwell the participants. This is what the children are indoctrinated in public schools today, at least in the Western world. Number 3, the marriage bed should be kept in honor, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. Some assert that there is an anything goes mentality to intimacy in marriage because the marriage bed is undefiled. However, the Bible prefaces that text by saying that marriage is first honorable. The text also states that fornication and adultery defile the marriage bed. The word for fornication in the Greek word porneia, which means it is the Greek word porneia, which comes with the word pornography, which means illicit sexual intercourse. So sex acts that God deems as illicit are not acceptable just because it is practiced in the confines of a marriage. It defiles the marriage bed, which should be held in honor. The question then becomes, are acts of sodomy illicit? Number 4, God gives us good gift, James 1:17. God does not give us gift that would cause us harm. Therefore, we can look at the function, purpose, and design of certain acts to determine whether or not this would be considered natural in God's eyes. If a sexual act is ordained by God, it is natural, then it would have certain inherent protections for the participants in the act. Number 5, design. The woman and man are given sexual parts that physically correlate to and fit each other. They are designed to meet together naturally without forced manipulation. Number 6, protection. God designed protections into the body for this interaction. The lining of the uterus is designed to prevent the semen from entering into the bloodstream of the woman. God does not provide the same protections for acts of sodomy. These acts can disrupt normal bodily functions and cause damage to bodily systems. There is also an element of danger involved in the act of oral sex performed on women that can lead to death. It is not a protected act in terms of the body designs the way that sexual intercourse is. Union. Men and women being joined together sexually become one flesh only when it occurs during sexual intercourse. Procreation. Children can only result during sexual intercourse. We can see by its design, function, and purpose that sexual intercourse between a man and a woman is a natural use of sex. All of these elements work together to provide a safe, enjoyable, and purposeful interaction. The same cannot be said for acts of sodomy. And this again in 2021, when this material is being prepared, that will shock many people, even so-called Christian, to discover that oral sex and anal sex is not permitted of God. But not only that, it is actually termed sodomy. Number 9, it is uncleanness. Apart from the physical uncleanness of the act, there is a spiritual component. Romans chapter 1 described men's degradation into reprobation, which we saw, confusing reality with fiction, as schizophrenia does to the mind. Men does not just wake up one day reprobate, but they are a series of steps man takes further and further into sin. The sin immediately preceding homosexuality is man and woman dishonoring their bodies between themselves with uncleanness. The word for dishonor in that text is a derivative of the word honorable in the Hebrews 13 verse 4 text about marriage. This refers also to all heterosexual act or sexual sin, oral copulation, anal copulation, bestiality. And this is again under Leviticus chapter 18 and chapter 20, which we saw. And this is true education. True education uphold the universal law of God. And when we want to counteract false education, we need to build the bricks and the mortar of true education in order to destroy all the falsehood of false education in every area. So we brought you in with chemistry, biochemistry, and biology, which was basically anatomy and physiology of the human body, but more specifically of the reproduction system. The reproduction system, or some people call it reproductive system, is a very, very important system as it assures the continuity of the human race. And if it is sabotage, which that's what's happening today, if it is sabotage through intercourse that are not approved of God, through homosexuality, lesbianism, and all kind of different approach, which is always under the umbrella of sodomy, because there is no other way to have intercourse between the same sex. And this is abomination before the Lord, and it destroys the reproduction system and many other systems of the body. Number 10, it is an unnatural use. Romans chapter 1 verse 26 states, "For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their woman did change the natural use into that which is against nature." And here the word used is the Greek word kresis, which refers to use of the sexual parts of the woman. Note that there is a natural use and an unnatural use. What the women were doing with each other sexually was unnatural use of that part of their bodies. Similarly, we're told in Romans 1 verse 27 that the acts performed between the men was likewise unnatural. And likewise also the man leaving the natural use of the woman, burning their lust one toward another, man with man, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. Romans chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, not only condemns the affection that draw men and women to the same gender, which are vile affections, it also condemns the act that they perform as a result of these desires, which are against nature. And we know today, to teach such a matter, it's a very, very dangerous things, we're told. But somebody got to do it. Number 11, it formats the mind to be asexual. Asexual means you have no longer any gender. The act itself is not gender specific. In an attempt to validate homosexuality as a norm, Jamak I. Waters' book, The Mythology of Transgression, Homosexuality as Metaphor, states how the masculine and feminine depiction of Baal Peor represents a bigender nature. He goes on to say that during the worship of Baal Peor, priests dressed as women and priestesses dressed as men. The transgender cross-dressing is entirely consistent with the asexual nature of the act. Since it can be performed by anyone who has a mouth, gender becomes irrelevant. It is an intentional blurring of the sexes. That makes participation in this act a critical step for Satan to use in preparing man's mind for the acceptance of homosexuality. God is able to give husbands and wives a fulfilling, exciting, and pleasurable intimate relationship because that is how He designed it to be. Again, we're speaking as clearly but as purely as possible of this terrible abomination which needs to be met. We sometimes forget that sex was God's gift to married people, and He knows what He is doing. Yet through the worship of Baal Peor, Satan was able to ensnare the nation of Israel, and he's still trying to do the same today. And today more than ever, very prevalent for the past 15, 16 years, it has been officially legislated by civil government, which had no right to legislate the definition of marriage and change the definition of marriage because this is a universal law of the Creator Himself. So they are guilty in that matter. Number 2, cancer, oral sex, and presidential politics. Did Bill Clinton cause an increase in throat cancer? This was actually July 5th, 2012 in a blog and updated December 6, 2017. For those of you who may not know, Bill Clinton was the president of the United States and he was charged with indecency. And his indecency, he declared not being really intercourse because he practiced oral sex. And this has brought a pandemic worse than COVID-19. American sexual behavior. Brian Fisher is the host of the daily Focal Point radio talk program on AFR Talk, a division of the American Family Association. Focal Point airs live from 1 to 3 p.m. Central Time. It is also a simulcast on the FA channel, which can be seen on the Sky Angel Network. It's a Christian program. Is oral sex a health hazard? Fisher says that oral sex can be bad for your health. Unfortunately, he may be right. With more than 30,000 new cases a year, cancer of the mouth and throat are on the rise, especially among the young. A 2007 study found that people with oropharyngeal cancers were considerably more likely to have had multiple oral sex partners than a cancer-free control group. Another study found that oral sex and even open mouth kissing facilitates the transmission of human papillomavirus, which is HPV, which is the malicious family of bugs which can cause genital warts and cancer. But what really got Fisher in a twit was January 2012 study, which found that 7% of Americans aged 14 to 69 are infected with oral HPV. This spells trouble as the most common variety of the HPV in people's mouth. It is also almost the most virulent in terms of causing cancer. So this is very evident study, even age 14, that was in 2012. Now it has gone even younger. And some people are wondering why we can address that with young people. Them more than anybody else should need this, as wisdom, to learn wisdom in these matters because it's all around them. Temptation is all around them. And don't think because they are Christian that they are preserved from it. Oddly, Fisher neglected to mention another STD. It's a disease that is associated with oral sex, which is herpes. In times past, the simplex 1 variant of herpes was considered a non-sexually transmitted oral form of the virus, which caused cold sores around the mouth. A different form, herpes now simplex 2, was thought to cause the STD genital herpes. But because of the increased popularity of oral sex, more and more people are showing up at their doctors with cold sores herpes infection on their genitals. Indeed, at the University of Wisconsin, the proportion of student genital sores caused by herpes simplex 1 jumped from 31% in 1993, when Bill Clinton became the president, to 78% in 2001, the year Clinton was replaced by his successor. And this is from Al Herzog, which is a professor of psychology at Western Carolina University. So these scholars are very, very concerned with what's happening, and this is not just happening in the USA, it's worldwide. Oral sex linked to rise in men's throat cancer. This report is from 2010, and remember that in science, 2010, it's not old. For years now, doctors have urged young women to be vaccinated against the human papillomavirus, the HPV, which is believed to cause cervical cancer. But now, growing research in Europe and the United States is implicating HPV in a rising number of cases of head and neck cancer in men, and many doctors are recommending that all boys be vaccinated as well. Doctors say that changing sexual behaviors like earlier sex, more partners, especially oral sex, are contributing to a new epidemic of oropharyngeal squamous cell cancers, those of the throat, tonsils, and base of the tongue. These cancers can be deadly and are striking men at a younger age and in increasing numbers. There's a lag in information, said Dr. John Deacon, a medical oncologist at Georgetown University. We, physicians, have done a poor job of advertising the fact that boys and girls should have a vaccine. The kind of cancer traditionally affects male who have been smoking. This kind of cancer is usually with male who have been smoking and drinking all their life. And now in their mid-60s, they are getting head and neck cancer. However, HPV cancer we are seeing in younger patients who have never smoked. This is what they see now. 2 decades ago, about 20% of all oral cancers were HPV related, but today, that number is more than 50%, according to studies published by the American Association for Cancer Research. Remember, this is a report from 2010. Can you imagine 10 years later? It did not diminish. Similarly, high rates have also been seen in Europe, where a new Swedish study has shown a strong correlation between oral cancers and oral sex. Oddly, the rising rates have not been seen yet in Southern Hemisphere, in Australia and New Zealand. Each year, more than 30,000 new cases of cancer of the oral cavity and pharynx are diagnosed, and more than 8,000 people die from oral cancer, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Cure rates are higher than for smoking-related throat cancer, but still only 50%. Today, men are more likely to get oral cancer than are women, but as the epidemic grows, that could soon change. We expect in head and neck cancers that 85% are men and 15% are women, said Deacon. But over the coming years, that could become equal. It's going to take a couple of decades to see the trend turning around. The epidemiological risk cancer are past sexual partners as well as marijuana exposure, not just oral sex. Again, with the human papilloma virus affecting more men, HPV is the most common sexually transmitted infection. Those who are infected often have no symptoms and pass it on to their partners through genital contact during vaginal and anal sex. It can also be transmitted during oral sex and more rarely during deep kissing through saliva. There are more than 100 strains of the virus. Some cause genital warts, but others can result in cell change that decades later can become cancerous. Each strain is identified by a number. Oral and cervical cancer are caused by HPV, subtypes 16 and 18. HPV can also cause cancer of the vulva, vagina, penis, and anus, and there is some evidence it is associated with esophageal and lung cancer. By now, you must have understood that this is caused by the fact that when young people now and adults are practicing these sodomy, this act of oral and anal sex, they have no protection. As we look at now Gardasil, which has been approved for girls in 2006 and for boys for treatment of genital and anal warts in 2009. The vaccine can be given at any age, though it is most effective given young people before an sexual exposure. Doctor says it could prevent 10,000 more cases of oral cancer a year. Several deaths associated with the vaccine leads doctors to advise caution in the rush to promote widespread use of the vaccine, and doctor says that there is a lack of public awareness of its role in preventing cancer. With any new vaccine, you have to err on the side of caution, but every year we know more about it. So they're all experimental vaccine. But we have to ask the question, what do we do for the spouses and kids of our patients? I don't see any downside to vaccination at this time. My son and daughter will get it because humans are the only reservoir for HPV. It could be eliminated like smallpox, he said. The research isn't new, but it has not received wide attention, perhaps because of taboo associated with oral sex. It's not taboo, it's abomination. Oral sex has become more commonplace. People have more sex partners and have sex earlier in life. All behavior linked to HPV-related oral cancers, according to a study of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention report. A study of the Swedish Karolinska Institutet showed the risk of developing oral HPV infection increased with the rise in lifetime oral and or vaginal sex partner. It also cited open-mouth kissing. The study included 542 American students and noted similar increase in such cancers in Britain, Finland, and the Netherlands. But Dr. Kevin Cullen, we're almost done, director of University of Maryland's Maryland and Stewart's Greenbaum's Cancer Center, is not sure only oral sex is to blame. It's hard for me to believe sexual behaviors have changed that much in 15 to 20 years, he said. It may be that, as happens, epidemic get enough people infected and an infection begins to take off. And that may have happened with HPV at some point. A study Cullen did last year found that HPV-related oral cancer in African American were less common than whites, perhaps because of negative cultural attitude about oral sex. Well, praise the Lord. Great man. But it looks like blacks are beginning to catch up with whites, which is sad. Scientists also don't know why women tend to develop cervical cancer while men have more throat cancer. Maybe women are better able to transmit to a man than a man to the oral mucosa of a woman. Doctors also think that cancer is likely to develop in the first area of exposure in women, usually the vagina. The woman may then develop later immunity in the throat. But with more oral sex, often before vaginal sex, female throat cancer could increase, they say. Very little HPV was seen until the 1980s. It was very rare in our archives, but each year we looked, it was more prevalent. Why? No one is really sure. Doctor says those numbers have not yet peaked. There is increasing evidence that boys as well as girls should be vaccinated. Men and women are increasingly going to face the burden of cancer, and we have a tool to prevent it. Why the medical community has not fully embraced vaccination is not clear. The lead time for development of oral cancer is in decades, so to do definite studies will take decades to do. He said the FDA picked the simpler task of preventing HPV warts in the short time frame. Resistance also comes from safety concerns as well as the fear by some group that vaccination for a sexually transmitted disease will promote sexual behavior. Cervical cancer may just be sexier than throat cancer. A family physician in the Georgetown University School of Medicine says, "We don't think about oral cancer except in smokers. There is no question HPV is the cause of most oral cancer, but it's partly an awareness issue relating to our kids' sex life, and we want to talk about oral sex anyway. Convincing parents to vaccinate their sons as well as their daughter is a hard sell," said Mishori. "Oftentimes, it's the mom who takes the kid to the doctor, and we tell them we have this great vaccine that can prevent their daughter from getting cervical cancer." She says, but mom can easily relate. But it's harder to tell her to give her son these 3 painful shots so that he won't transmit it to his girlfriend in the future and might not transmit cancer or have oral cancer himself. As for potential side effect with the vaccine, Mishuri said that those concerns are pretty minor compared with the potential. "It hasn't been around too long, but it's being tested on thousands of women," she said. "The fact that the vaccine prevents cancer is astounding in itself." Well, this is my personal note. You may not agree with it, but instead of vaccine, why don't we teach our sons and daughters abstinence, purity, and chastity? This is such a merry-go-round that's going nowhere. So now they're going to have a vaccine so that the people can be more promiscuous and they won't have to worry about getting cancer or getting all these sexually transmitted disease. Let's go back for a few minutes before we close that section of our study on the principle of anatomy and physiology and the way our Creator has made the human body. The problem that we see here with oral sex and anal sex, which that's what it was mentioned, that it does destroy the human body, and rightly so, they should be scared about that, because when a person performs the oral sex, not only it will definitely give cancer in the mouth and in the throat, but being that the male seminal fluid is a very, very easy liquid to be coming through the body by the mouth or by the anus, and then it will infiltrate through the lungs, it will infiltrate through the digestive system, and it can actually destroy these systems, evidently. And what is very fascinating too from a point of view of chemistry, the way the Lord had made the male seminal fluid, if we remember what we saw a few minutes ago, is that the seminal fluid contained an antibiotic, a seminal plasmin that is called, with the ability to destroy a number of bacteria. But we remember that the pH of the seminal fluid or the semen is alkaline at 7.20 to 7.60. But it has to also, when it's effective with the antibiotic, it's when it's in the right field, which we have seen with the woman, with the genital of the woman, the reproduction system, which is an acidic pH. But when the seminal fluid of the male is introduced in any other area than where it's intended to be, which is the reproduction system of the female, and it's now introduced orally or through anal approach, we know for sure that this antibiotic will not protect anymore as it was supposed to be because of the number of bacteria that the seminal fluid carries. And this is where we would like to propose that this is what is causing more of the disease than anything else, because it's breaking the laws. It's breaking the universal laws of biochemistry. It's breaking the universal laws of the Creator, that the seminal fluid was strictly to be used or to be introduced in the reproduction system of the female, and specifically at a certain pH so that it does not get introduced in the blood. The seminal fluid is not to be introduced into the blood, especially when the female is having her period, or if you just had a baby boy, she has to wait 40 days, and a baby girl. It can be not only fatal for her, but also fatal for the male. And then it can produce more cancer. So right now, at this time of Earth history, we are facing pandemic. We are facing the coronavirus, which is probably, compared with what we have just discussed, it's probably pale compared to the disaster and the damage that this is causing right now. And all that is because we have accepted in our midst the worship of Baal Peor. This is all related to Baal Peor worship, which we think that this is only in the Old Testament and it's only in the old days. Well, something that people have not realized, even if the pastor wants to remove Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, Lucifer is still alive. And Lucifer knows his time is short, Revelation 12:12. And he will do, and he's doing everything to destroy the human race. He hates the human race. He knows that the human race was actually created to replace him and the fallen angel, according to the writing of Mrs. White. And everything he can do, whether it's by addiction with alcohol or drugs or whatever way he can attack the human body, he will do it. And it's not a new invention, but in our Christian system, the Western world, we call it, we were protected as long as we were obedient to God's law. But now, even with the church being shut down now, God knows why, for a year and a half, I believe I know why. I believe that God has allowed it because we were not faithful. We have not studied as we should. We have not accepted to present the truth. And now we are coming to a point where basically the light is coming out, and those who are accepting it will be sealed. And those who hear it and refuse it, this is their close of probation as well. And we hope and pray by the grace of God that we will not prolong any longer the coming of the Lord by continuing to be silent and not say anything. Not saying anything in a time of crisis, it's exactly the same as participating in that crisis and causing it. So may we be faithful though the heaven fall, and may we be able to stand as the Lord is asking us to do. And I pray that the Lord will touch the heart in this presentation to understand this very, very important lesson. In the following study, we will be looking at the 613th statute, that you can find in the Word of God. And it will be available on 144,000 teachers for you to make copies as you may want to do if you want to preserve it in your library. May the Lord bless you and cause his face to shine upon you as we will pass to the next study.